dışarıda şeyler mevcut, kulaklıklar. Onu arada temin ederseniz makbule geçer. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the first International Sufi Studies Graduate Student Symposium. We're about to start our first panel, and after that there will be a break, followed by by Dr. Atif Khalil giving his planned lecture. Afterwards, the second panel will start. I made an announcement about the headphones, but I don't think anybody who knows English will need them. But anyway, excuse me. So if I could please have, birinci panelimizin oturum başkanı, yardımcı doçent doktor Cangüzel Güner Zülfikar, panelistlerimizi de davet ediyorum lütfen. Buyurun efendim.
Efendim hayırlı sabahlar, hoş geldiniz, safa geldiniz. Bugünün ilk oturumunu başlatıyoruz inşallah. Arkadaşımız Mustafa Fidan Beyefendi, Selçuk Üniversitesi Konya'dan geldiler.
Selçuk University Konya, and he is going to be here for the first presentation. Esteemed audience, before I start, I greet you all with respect. Before we start, I'd like to greet you all with respect. I brought you the greetings of Mevlana from Konya. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this function, and I would also like to thank everyone who made this symposium possible. My topic is the place of Esmaül Hüsna in Tasawwuf culture and examples of the Esmaül Hüsna and literary works in an example of Kuddusi Divan. In understanding the truth of Hakikat ilm, Tasawwuf is a guide for us, and there are different ways of wisdom and different manifestations of observing with the heart, and these manifestations manifest themselves through various forms of wisdom and in all that is created through Esmaül Hüsna. So the Sufis have expressed their observances about Esmaül Hüsna through their prose and poetry, so that they have contributed to create a ground of literature in Sufism. As you know, since Abu Hurairah, the reference of these names, we have been told that the learners of these names will be rewarded with heaven, and to learn these names, pretty much all of the literary works are designed to learn these names as per the statement of the hadith. So when we look at the lineup of these 99 names, they are mostly recited in a rhyming way so that it will be easy to memorize. As you can see, names like Al-Haq, Al-Baqi, Al-Wahid, Al-Ehad, and Al-Hay are all representing the oneness and unity of God, and these names tell us that nothing can ever be in any way ever similar to God in any aspect or dimension that they can manifest themselves in this universe. And Kudusi thinks that these names being reflected in the heart will be a reason for us to reach God and to recognize God's oneness. And in Tasawwuf terminology, this is the heart is accepted as the representation state of God. God Almighty's names like El-Wahhab, El-Razzaq, El-Mukit, El-Ghani, El-Mughni, El-Malik, Malikul Mulk represent the abundance, the prosperity, the generosity, and the giving of God, and nobody can ever be as rich or as giving as God, and how generously God Almighty disperses this richness to his subjects. And Kudusi says all ownership and everything belongs to God, and this is explained by the generosity of God. And Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, As-Salam, El-Ghaffar, El-Halim, El-Ghafur, El-Shekur, El-Tawwab are some of the names that tell us about the forgiveness of God. The believer, the mu'min, is between fear and hope, and these names keep the hope fresh and asks for forgiveness. And in our literature, these names are used in many places as the manifestation, reflection of the Jamal name of God, and has been used in many different types of prayer. And Kudusi tells us that the wrath of is overridden by the forgiveness of God. And when God tells us the rules and orders, God also follows us to see if we abide by them or not. In our literature, these names tell us that there is no end to the knowing of God, and God has bestowed to certain people some of his knowledge. And Kudusi tells us that in that Bayt, he says, nobody knows of me. You are the knower, and you are the seer, and you are the one who is closest to us. Also, El-Quddus, El-Azim, El-Ali, El-Kabir, El-Majid, El-Qadir, El-Muqtadir are some of the names that tell us about the mightiness and the discretion of God. In our literature, these names represent the fact that God is like nothing else. His grace and glory is higher than anything else, and through prayer they have been used for forgiveness as well. Also, names like El-Halik, El-Bari, El-Bedi, El-Musawwir, and El-Likes tell us about the power of creation of God Almighty. And these names in our literature have been used to tell us the unprecedented, uncomparable, perfect beauty of all the created, and that God has perfectly shaped and formed all the created. And we need to pray and abide God, knowing that endless power. Al-Hasib and Al-Hakim names of God are about the judgment and justness and fairness. These are also used as prayer content and tell us that the justness of God is certain and the truth and the good will eventually emerge and be revealed. Also, Qudusi tells it in another bait, telling that God is Halim and Hasib. In another bait, he uses the name of Al-Hakim other than the names we have already mentioned here. The other names, Allah, Veli, Mujib, Vedud, Sabur, Zülcelal vel Ikram, are the names that are not specifically mentioned in the Qudusi Divan, and they are put into the Divan as couplets of prayer and because of the greatness of God Almighty's power. And the name of God, Mujib, is also used in the Qudusi Divan. In conclusion, we can say that Qudusi, who was born on the 11th day of Hijri Rabi'ul Awwal, has been one of the important religious Sufi names of our classic literature, late 18th and early 19th century. Being such a strong poet, Qudusi has shown how the Sufi side of his personality overpowers the literature, and he has many other works of poetry that he has eloquently used the other Asma'ul Husna. And Qudusi has used 58 of the 99 names, and 1448 of his baits, couplets, include Asma'ul Husna. Thank you so much for your attention.
Mustafa Bey'e çok teşekkür ederiz. Edebiyatımızdan
Thank you so much to Mr. Mustafa for delivering these wonderful examples from our literature. Let's hope you will keep up the good work and get them published. And also I would like to thank you especially for honoring the time. And now we have one of the students, Vedide Fanosçu, will tell us about cultivation of the concept of love in İlahiyat-ı Kenan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allah'a hamdü senalar, peygambere salat ve selam olsun. Tüm hocalarımı ve dinleyicileri Allah'ın selamıyla selamlarım. Efendim, bu çalışmanın konusu
audience with Allah's salam. This paper is about the 20th century Sufi master Kenan Rifai, and we will have a look at the poetry in İlahiyat-ı Kenan and to see how he had actually delved into the concept of love. Love is actually has the power of making people change according to the love, aşk. So we will try to understand the concept of love with the comments of Kenan Rifai. Kenan Rifai, when he was actually an officer in Balıkesir, he actually learned music and started to play the ney. He also played the violin and the piano, and he actually used the music as a way of guiding. So after his murshid has passed away, he went to Medine and he actually composed his ilahis, his hymns there. Some ilahis are first published in 1925, and then in 1925 all the ilahi hymns are published in İlahiyat-ı Kenan with a Mustafa Sherif introduction, acknowledgement. In 1925, Dr. Ziya Cemal Bey has actually added the musical notes, and then it has been republished. In 1975-74, Yusuf Ömürlü and Dinçel Dalkılıç actually added some new notes and some new hymns, and it has been published in today's alphabet. The last print that we have is actually by Mustafa Tahralı. All the poetry and the musical notes are compiled together. So we have Nats, Münacat, and Metiye. There are the levels of ego, nefs, and ascension as well, but the most common themes are love and the states of the lover. So there are actually titles in the hymns as well, which is different from others. I would like to point out that all the perfected men can be conceived and perceived according to one's own capacity. So it is just like someone trying to look through a hole to the whole horizon. So it's not a very easy task for us. So let me ask for mercy, and may Allah give us the understanding to be able to understand his poetry. Aşk has got 3 stages: cünun, fünun, and sükun. The real objective, the aim of existence is love, actually. Samiha Ayverdi says the realization of love is the spirit. It is only love that makes spirit alive. How can love be attained? Kenan Rifai says it's not through training, it's not through attempt, because lover should actually be free of will. During the phase of cünun, what is aşk? Is actually a very good example. So through a divine attraction, the lover is actually free of intellect and complains about the separation. So this is such a explanation is actually through all the perfected men's writings. So all this longing is actually explained as a complaint. But in one of the discourses in Kenan Rifai, love, divine love, means to prioritize it over all the other kinds of love. So love is actually a bloody path. So Kenan Rifai actually says the Prophet's ascension is like an ecstasy. It's only through the attraction of God so that one can ascend. It's not possible if there is no ladder descended from God. So it's actually known that one of the signs of love is obedience. So whatever is manifest from God, so lovers should not be able to complaining. So how can we actually evaluate this? And Kenan Rifai answers this. And the fire of love is not from suffering, is not from the lack of gratitude. It is actually because of the lover's lover's voice would like to be heard by God. So the and the complaint about the lover is not actually because the real complaint, it is because of the heartbrokenness of separation and because of the destiny of love. If there is no then you're not in love, because is actually the name of God's essence, the name of God's beautiful face. For Kenan Rifai's such a longing for Allah is actually a manifest. It's not actually against good manners, but sometimes people actually ask the question, how can we say love doesn't have good manners? Who is love? Love is someone who doesn't have an intellect, but the real good manners, best manners of lovers is quite different. It's actually above all the best manners that we know, because the lover's breath and dream is all about the beloved. Because good manners is something that is offered to the intellect, so you may not accept good manners as we know from lovers. Adam actually considered the fruit in the heaven, and Adam wanted to eat that fruit, and he was told, you should actually eat this, you should be descended to the earth, and then you can actually really feel the longing for love, and that's how Adam eats this fruit. So what actually attains you to the beauty is ashq. How will this happen? What is the connection between Jalal and ashq? Jalal is actually the wrath of God. The manifestation of Allah will actually be able to eradicate everything other than God in the lover's body. So this is the most powerful tool to make you attain God. So in the Junoon stage, when you are in full attraction and in fire of love, you won't be able to contributing to the wellness of the society, of the people. So if you actually are a piece of wood burning all the time, it wouldn't actually be suffice because it wouldn't heat the room. It would actually be.
Dolayısıyla vakti gelince bu emanet aşığın üzerinden çekilip alınacaktır. İşte
It should actually turn into a coal that is burning, that would heat the room. So when you actually exceed the junoon, the attraction, you should be in the second phase, you should be able to actually keep your love within and then pass on to the fünun stage. In the fünun stage, ashq, the lover should have wisdom. Here, the lover should know the nothingness, the annihilation, and the poverty of oneself. In Tazallumu Hal, Kenan Rifai, in his poem, he recites so. I am so dirty, how can I actually be before God? I am nothing, how can I actually be before Allah? When you are in front of me, when you have the door of blessing, who else can I pledge? So even though we may have problems, difficulties, or lackings in us, we should actually ask for Allah, because Allah is the forgiver. So there is nothing else but Allah that we can ask for forgiveness. So the biggest mistake is to be
başkasında görmektir. İşte nefsinin
to be away from God. So we know the deficiencies of our animal soul, but we also look for forgiveness and we follow God's path. And this is what we need to do. Knowledge means knowing self. And when you know yourself, you know your Lord. And when you know your Lord, you know actually how to be patient. And this is the part of putting all the knowledge into practice. So the knowledge, what is knowledge? What is Gnostics? It is to be able to see the oneness in multiplicity and to see God's manifestations in all beings. Even in one
Muhammedi demek zıt
in one denier, you can see the manifestation of God, then you can see the unity. This is the real human being. So this is the Gnostics, this is the Gnostics, this is the knowledge, and this is how you can actually put this knowledge into practice. The outcome of love is to be able to eradicate all your desires that belongs to your animal soul. So let's now have a look at the
dörtlüğünde tasavvuf nazariyesinde cemül cem makamı olarak kabul edilen vahdeti kesrette ve kesreti vahdette görme haline işaret vardır. Öyle sermestim ki bilmem ben mi aşkım aşk mı ben, imtizaçtan seçmez oldum, ten mi ruhtur ruh mu ten. Ben isem aşk, aşk nedir? Ya ben neyim ger aşksa ben? Aklı fikrim bunlar işte, bende sergerdan eder. Kenar Rifai aşkın sükun evresine ermiş olan ariflerin icabında ve sırasında sırf halka irşat maksadıyla söz söylediklerini belirtir. İşte artık sadece gerektiğinde ve irşat maksadıyla söz söyleyen arifin şiirlerinin de hikmet ve irşat teması üzerine olduğu görülür. Gökten İsa indi, Mehdi zahir oldu meydana, kesti Deccali, kötü huylardan oldu kalp reha. Gitti benlik, öldü Deccal, kalmadı zat-ı sıfat, aşkın oldu her taraf, kalp buldu zulmetten necat. Şiirin devamında nefsin, kalp, ruh, sır ve hafi mertebelerinden terakki ederek ruhi kuts olan akla evvel şuuruna ulaşması gibi yüksek metafizik bir konuyu herkesin bildiği bir hikaye ile somutlaştırmış ve manzum bir uslupla çok sade bir şekilde ifade ederek anlaşılır kılmış olan Kenan Rifai'nin edebi ve tasavvufi kabiliyeti gözler önüne serilir. Şöyle devam eder. Razıyım, eflakte olmaktansa emlake karin, bu zeminde olmak elbet mazharı aşkı mübin. Nimet-ü ihsanı cennetten mualla Kenan'a, burada olmak, kamilin kalbinde pür zevkü ebin. Kenan Rifai, kulları Allah'a ulaştıracak yollar arasında en kestirmesi bir akil kişinin gölgesinde olmak ve ona hizmet eylemektir. İnsanın dünyaya gelmesinden maksadı da bu yetiştirici ve tamamlayıcı kamil kişiyi bulup terbiyesine girmektir diyerek mürşidin ahlakıyla ahlaklanarak onun rızasını almayı, onun ilmiyle hizmet etmeyi her şeyden üstün tutar. Kenan Rifai'nin aşk tasavvurunu kendisinin şu sözleri özetler. Dinin esası imandır. İmanın ruhu da ameldir. İmanın kemali Allah sevgisidir. Amelin kemali de halk sevgisidir. Yani kul nerede bulunursa bulunsun, kula düşen Allah'ın kendisiyle beraber olduğunu bilerek onu sevmek ve halkın Allah'tan gayrı olmadığını da bilerek hakkı sevmektir. İşte aşıklıktan gaye iptidai hallerden geçerek sükûna ermek ve hakkı halkta görerek kendine bu sevgiyle insanlığın hizmetine adamaktır. Efendim sonuç olarak Kenan Rifai'den seçilen dizelerde aşk kavramının İlahiyatı Kenan'da nasıl dile getirildiğine bakmaktan ana gaye, ilahi aşk kavramı hakkında doktrinal tahliller yapmak değildi. Bir ehli aşkın dilinden aşkın edebi nefaset içindeki dışa vurumunu referans alarak aşkın bir beşeri hakiki insan makamına çıkarmaktaki mürebbili sürecine bir kamilin örnek yaşantısından istifade ederek bir fikir edinmekti. Kenan Rifai'nin halkla muamelesindeki düstur, her şeyi hak bilmek, hak görmek ve hak sevgisiyle severek muamele etmektir. Onun ilahi aşk anlayışındaki en bariz özellik, Allah sevgisini mücerretlikten kurtararak hayata tatbik etmiş olmasıdır. O cümle mevcudatı Allah'ın tecellisi bilerek şöyle der. Her insan Hakk'ın başka bir suretinde bize el uzatan sadık bir dosttur. Ona göre ayar yoktur fakat zıtlar vardır ve ancak bu zıtları birleyerek hayret içinde temaşa edebilme kabiliyetine ermek, Allah'ın cemaline müşahit olmaktır. Kendisini Şeyhül Garam, yani aşk şeyhi olarak tasvir eden Kenan Rifai, insanı terbiyede en tesirli etken olarak aşkı görmüş ve kullanmıştır. Sami Ayverdi, Kenan Rifai'nin ahlak anlayışını bir cümleyle ifade etmek istersek ona sevgi ahlakı diyebiliriz diye belirtir. Efendim, aşkın mahiyetine dair söz söyleyebilmek mümkün olmasa da ancak bir aşığın vücudunda tecelli edip de zahir olunca keyfiyet kazanan aşkı, bizler de ancak aşk ehli olan o insani kamillerin yaşamlarından seyreder ve öğreniriz. İşte Kenan Rifai de o ele gelmez, söze dökülmez olan mücerret aşkı müşahhaslaşmış olarak görüyor ve aşkı bizzat aşk kesilmiş bu kamil insandan seyretme lütfuna sahip oluyoruz. Tebliğimi Samiha Ayverdi'nin İlahiyatı Kenan için yazdığı mukaddimedeki şu sözleriyle bitirmek isterim. İşte elinizde bulunan bu kitap, o büyük veli Kenan Rifai Hazretleri'nin kütleleri içine davet ettiği insanlık, İslam, iman ve ihlas cennetidir. Her satırında bir hikmet ve irfan çağlayan bu manzum irşatname, onu kendine rehber ittihaz eden kimseler için bitip tükenmez bir hazine olarak dünyanın bağrına dikilmiş abidevi bir feyz kalesidir. Allah idrakini nasip etsin.
Teşekkürler. 3 dakika.
Vedide is a graduate of engineering of physics from University of Bosphorus, and then she came to our Tasawwuf Research Institute, and her excitement from what she has read reflected itself, and these are very nice and positive feelings that you shouldn't be refraining from, and with time they will become more fruitful. What matters is that they get published, and God willing, I'm telling this first to myself, of course. Now we shall continue with the presentation of Sema Nurbal, who is a graduate of University of Selçuk as an industrial engineer. I am stressing this again because all people in our institute come from different walks of life and from different professions and disciplines, which enables them to incorporate what they have learned from other disciplines, and God willing, it shall be more beneficial, I hope. Sema Nurbal will talk about Anne-Marie Schimmel's time in Turkey, and she is an undergrad student in Tasawwuf Research Institute, and Anne-Marie Schimmel contributed strongly to the history of Sufism, and she is one of the most important Orientalists of the last century. Between 1954 and 57, she worked in the School of Divinity in University of Ankara, and this scientist had interactions in Turkey. This is the topic of my paper. She was born in Germany in 7th of April 1922 in Germany, Erfurt, and the father was Paul Schimmel, a postman, and the mother was Anna Schimmel, who was a housewife, and she had been a very strong supporter and also read her books as an editor and had been her best critic, and she tells us that the Orient was her passion after a book that she read, the Padmanabha and Hassan, the Oriental story. And when she was the age of 22, she had all sorts of photos of the padishahs and Oriental instruments. After high school, she needs to have 6 months of obligatory duty before she can start the university, and that is why she needed to live in a ghetto in Mordorf, and she took an Arabic book with herself, but it has been taken away from her because no German girl should ever learn Arabic, but they found a new book thanks to her mother, and she wrote a letter to the Imam of Mosque of Berlin, and she wanted to stay in Lahore with a Muslim family so that she could develop her language. And in 1939 she got enrolled in University of Berlin to the Department of Chemistry and Physics, and she spent her free time on Islamic arts, reading Arabic and Turkology. And in summer break she has been appointed as an officer in a telephone company, and with her first pay she bought her first Mesnevi of Mevlana. And then the Germany-Russia war had started, and Schimmel lost her father. The 3 volumes of Mevlana's Mesnevi and Serraj's Kitab-ül Luma and Gauthey's East and West Divan were her books, other than her 2 changes of clothes when she was traveling to Marburg. And she is the only person who has been given a doctorate degree in theology faculty, and she later came into contact with Turkey. For her, Istanbul was a place, a unique city that is engraved with Sufism and literature. Corner by corner, she went through Istanbul, and she has recognized this country with the poetry of the poets of Turkey. And she has been greeted by Behçet Necatigil and his spouse, and later his friend from Marburg, Mustafa İnan, and the spouse Jale have hosted her. And the late days was in the Maçka Cafe with Behçet Necatigil, Salah Birsel, Cahit Külebi, Haldun Taner, Samim Kocagöz, and she has seen this as an amazing opportunity. And in the times that she was listening to the poets of the modern poetry, she also defended the ancient tradition with references from Yahya Kemal's lines. And she has translated Endülüs'te Raks to him, and also she has used the name Cemile Kıratlı and published her articles in Istanbul, Yeditepe and Hayat magazines. And whenever she was called Anne Marie, she warned them saying, "My name is Cemile, please don't call me Anne Marie." And she was in the circles of Sufi personalities when she was in Marburg University, and she was friends with Samiha Ayverdi. That was an eternal friendship, and she dedicated her book My Soul is a Woman to Miss Samiha Ayverdi. And in the preface she says that she was able to realize many religious truths thanks to the women she knew in Turkey. And in their correspondence she seldom talks about the daily stuff, and it's mostly about the religious topics. And In 40 years of correspondence, they talked about many issues and they were very close. They have been later published, and this tells us that their closeness lasted until the very last day. And Shimel says the letters were written as the wings of a bird, and they are a testament to a very important era. And this tells us how much you are in us, within us, one from us, said Samiha Ayverdi, and always kept her close. And she says, I have found you to be so close to my heart that I was with you all night long. And Shimel said, I found in you what I have been looking for, which tells us the role of Samiha Ayverdi in the life of Annemarie Shimel. And everybody thanked her one by one, she says to herself, but then says to Miss Samiha Ayverdi, you actually are the true owner of all of these thank yous that are given to me.
Shimel started working at Ankara University in 1954 and initiated the establishment process of the Department of Theology, and also prepared and published a book called Introduction to History of Religions. And with that task, Jamila was only desiring one thing, taking a post at one of the Turkish universities, and if she hadn't done so, her desire could even have served for the same purpose. On one hand, she was trying to deliver the lectures, and on the other hand, she was making translations and writing papers and articles, and also sent all those to Ayverdi. And Shimel thinks and defines the date that she moved to Ankara as a historical moment, and she also had a recitation of a Quran with Kani Karaca, and received Kudum classes from Karaca, and went on with their friendship. And Shimel preferred that her Turkish friends over the German ones, because in all the conversations she expresses that she felt the excitement of learning new things. In particular, simple illiterate village women's knowledge and understanding impresses her a lot, and she also writes in her autobiography about Rumi. And Shimel trained many others, and also expresses herself that her knowledge came into form with the interaction of the others. And she also addresses that this is the most important point, and she says, interestingly, the Muslim know the Christianity better than us, and this shows on what common grounds we, the Muslim and the Christians, have. Of course, together with that, the differences cannot be ignored, she articulated. Whenever she had a chance, she traveled across Anatolia. Konya, she visited Konya with the couplets of Rumi, and when she was asked if she could deliver a lecture, a conference, she said she couldn't desire anything else. And during whirling of dervishes, she expresses the longing of musiki, and also the couplets of Rumi and their reflection on the whirling experience. What an experience it was. Were we dreaming, or was it the truth, she said. The friendships Shimel had in Turkey also went on with Mehmet Önder and İzzet Koyunoğlu, the founder of Mevlana Rumi Museum. And other than many inscriptions and works, she also tried on gold kaftans, and the literature of Mevlana is Ismail, and Ismail Muholu, to whom she dedicated her book to, was one other figure that she spent time with. And in Divan they talked about arts and religion, and listened to Ney from a guest, and all the European guests who happened to come to Konya, all the artists were hosted with modesty, and they all left the city stating that she was a sister to them. And she traveled across Anatolia with an old car, and as someone who had her heart in Anatolia, knew that Yunus and Mevlana wouldn't mistake her and would protect her from some of the evil to come to her way. And Shimel states that her mother wanted twins before she was born, and now Turkey is her twin. Had become her twin, and she states only with such a vision of comprehension I can create such a world. She translated many works and took information from first-line resources and corrected many mistakes, and introduced the West to the East and the East to the West, and worked for establishing bridges in between the two. And Iwer says you are not a commodity of neither Germany nor Turkey, but you are a monument for the humanity. And when she was making a research about Sufism, rather than observation, she preferred experiencing and expressed Sufis through the words of Sufism. And with these all, she also never refrained from questioning the reliability of Islamic resources when it was necessary. The reason for creation of the humanity is to reach out to the truth of creation. Shimel had the time to travel and live across Turkey, and with Ayverdi they had a murid and murshid relationship, and came to comprehend the truth of that. Shark rhymes, music, art were rather more interesting for her, while the ones for the West were somehow interesting. And we can see in what serious look she was. And am I a good murid of yours was the question that she asked in her letter, and you can see the good relations in between them. And Shimel, in summary, spent all her life to understand and experience and express what Islam was, and through Inkishaf she tried to see the reflection of truth. She died in Bonn in Germany, and as Mustafa Hoca says, she had two statements. One was about a fairy tale and a hadith written engraved on her gravestone, and the other thing was the translation of Fatiha and its recitation. And with this poem, we would like to thank Sema Nurbal for her presentation. MashaAllah. Now we will be leaving the floor to Eylül Yalçınkaya. She is a PhD student at Uludağ University Institute of Social Sciences, and she delivers lectures at our institute. And she will be talking about an example of the beautiful conduct of the Prophet Muhammad. Kenan Rifai's honored this position according to Semiha Cemal. The floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil Alemin. Esselatu vesselamu ala Resulina ve alel mürselin. Değerli hazirun, hoş geldiniz.
Esteemed audience, I welcome you on a Saturday morning. I appreciate your coming here. We have very excited friends who are in love, and I am one of them. There's a famous saying, if all the people loved who I have loved, then all of our words would be a story of the beloved. So that beloved can be a topic of a graduate degree, because right now I am studying Kenan Rifai's life and works and everything. So I also want to talk about him as well. I'm sure all my friends are like that, and our friend Vedide's presentation really made me very happy and excited. Why did I choose this topic to share with you? Because I didn't want to go away from the story.
Henüz Cemal Nur hocamla yeni tanıştığımda bir gün kendilerinin konağında
When he was in 20 years old, during the celebration of Kandil, Kenan Gürsoy and Cemal Nur Hoca gave me an Ottoman text. I was just a new graduate from the divinity faculty, but I wasn't very competent in the manuscripts of Ottoman Turkish, and they asked me whether I could read, but then I started crying and I said, and inshallah I can do it. So they gave it to my hand. So I looked at the text. Let me just show you the text. You will probably be understanding me. This is the text. I can now read it very easily, but then when I was 20 years old, it was so complicated for me. So I could actually try to sort it out, and in 2 weeks I was able to read it. I was doing my master's then, but then I quit doing master's at that time, which is a very surprising time for me. So this was actually the reason why I stopped my master's degree then, but I can now see that this is a source of an academic text, so I see now that this could actually be a thesis. So who wrote it? The title is from Semiha Cemal, Kenan Rifai's honored disposition. Perhaps Semiha Cemal's mother Nazlı Hanım may also have written that, or sometimes because of modesty they may not actually have written down their names, and they may have said this is through Semiha Cemal Hanım, so it may actually be Nazlı Hanım then. So my teacher from Bursa, Mustafa Hanım, says every book has got a destiny. A book gets written, but it's being published and shared by folk, by the people, may take time. So the author should not actually be measuring the worth of the book with that. It may take some time. So Semiha Cemal actually passed away at a very young age. So there is also another work of hers, Aşk Peygamberi, the Prophet of Love. It's not been published yet, but this is also one of her works that he wrote down and put aside. So let's now see who Semiha Cemal Hanım is. So, and then I will pass on to the text. Semiha Cemal, Kenan Rifai's Caliph Siyah Cemal Bey's and closest murid Nazlı Hanım's little sister. He actually in 1926 graduated from the high school. So we actually can understand this from our own understanding. Darul Fünun is actually a very important place to graduate. This is a high school level, but in 1926 it is something that is very valuable. So it's not only for women actually, which is very valuable, it's also for men, for our country in then. In Izmir Girls High School, she taught philosophy, and she also taught Ruhiyat. She is the first female philosopher in Turkey. From Plato, from Marc Aurel, from Epictet, she translated into Turkish. In 1936, she passed away. Ziya Cemal Büyükaksoy, her elder brother, said so. The world is an outer apparent. So this burning body has actually got love and a monument of humanity. So he actually got trained and trained other people. So she actually paid his debt to this world. And as a mirror, as a polished mirror, as a very mature, perfected, polished mirror, she passed away and she left this world. In 1936, after suffering from a very severe disease for 8 months, she passed away. I didn't actually see her. I saw the person who saw her. So I actually know how she was initiated to this spiritual path. When she was 17 and 18 years old, Samiha Ayverdi and Semiha Cemal, coming from very high society, they actually went to visit Kenan Rifai. So Kenan Rifai, with all his knowledge and aristocrat stance at the same time, he affected those two little young ladies enormously. So they actually said this was a turning, the two ladies said this meeting was a turning point for their life. So they started to serve humanity after meeting, after visiting Kenan Rifai, because they both fell in love with Kenan Rifai. Kenan Rifai, first of all, I'd like to say how Semiha Cemal was before she met Kenan Rifai. She was actually withdrawn to herself and very arrogant of what she has known, indifferent, and she was a typical aristocrat young lady. So if she weren't in the hands of such a great murshid, she would actually get lost in her own knowledge. Just like Mevlana and Hüsamettin Çelebi, within the context of being a murshid and a murid, she found her real identity. So Kenan Rifai, in relationship with Semiha Cemal, he actually experienced the joy of being together with her mother, whom he loved greatly. So in her, he was actually seeking the love that he had towards her love. Samiha Ayverdi always said that Kenan Rifai always sought the love that he had towards his mother in every person that he met. So now we will see through Semiha Cemal's eyes the beautiful conduct of a perfected human being. So this is a translation of a state. This is a modern translation of a state. We know that his hymns are extremely full of love, especially the periods that Kenan Rifai had in Medina was a period of junun, but later Kenan Rifai had Fünun, and then when he met Semiha Cemal, these were the stages of sükun. I benefited a lot from this text. When I was working as a teacher, whenever I thought that I was dealing with too much academic stuff, I would go back to this text and read it, and I would see the harmony and the real beautiful conduct should be like that. I would like to also compliment and refer to my friends all the divine names that they have actually mentioned in their presentations were actually manifest in Kenan Rifai's states through these 3 stages of love in his life. Semiha Cemal says the most favorite of what he liked the most was to be able to actually teach what he loves. So wherever he sees any benefit, he takes it and wants to share it with people. So he has the enthusiasm of actually sharing the beautiful things with people. When he actually hears something very beautiful, he runs towards the people he loves and wants to share. Whatever good you want for you, he said, you should also be able to ask for others. So that's what a real lover is. So this is the first paragraph. This is a 16-page text. I would like to say a few things about this first paragraph. So knowing or teaching what you know is what he likes most. So this is actually the beautiful conduct of the prophets. So the prophets, with joy and enthusiasm, the first moment he got the wahi, revelation, he wanted to share it with us. So what is the most thing about knowledge? So knowledge, according to God's friends, is actually the knowledge of Allah, of course. So the Prophet says, be either a scholar or someone who listens to knowledge or someone who teaches knowledge. So I think don't be anything else. So this is very important. The Prophet also says the most exalted of you is the one who learns the Quran. And the most auspicious is again the one who reads the Quran and who teaches the Quran. So when the Prophet was getting the revelation from Jibreel, he would actually recite the verses very quickly. But then God says, don't panic, this is the knowledge of Allah, and that would be embedded in your heart. You won't forget, don't worry, you will be able to share with friends. But so the same thing is actually in Kenan Rifai. So he would actually share whatever he learned and knew. So what can we have out of the manifestations of divine names? So knowing and letting people know is actually the manifestation of Allah. So Allah actually oversees. Allah loves everything, loves himself. So that's why he wants all the universe to know what Allah conveys in his knowledge. Rahmet, mercy, is also one of the attributes of Allah. So wanting is actually one of the attributes of Allah. If Allah didn't want, he wouldn't have actually created this universe. So I think my time is over, so I would like you to introduce the text to you. He would definitely keep his promise because he knew that the word actually and the promise belonged to Allah. So he would never ever actually forget the good deeds, but he would definitely forget the bad deeds that people had performed before. So this is also the beautiful conduct of the Prophet, because the Prophet always forgave the things that have been done to him, even after the death of his uncle, you know. So he was behind each and every word of his. This is also the Prophet's Beautiful Conduct. In Hudaybiya peace contract, he didn't actually turn back. He kept his promise. So the members of the religions, other religions, actually witnessed how the Prophet kept his promise. Again, another example of the Prophet's beautiful conduct. A companion once said, we always witnessed in the Prophet to be able to do our own deeds ourselves. So even in a war, if our arrow would fall down, we would want to go off, get off our horse and would take the arrow by ourselves. So when he was actually speaking, when Kenan el-Rifai was speaking, he wouldn't actually make long speeches. And as he was speaking, he would think how to put it in action. And he wouldn't actually like to speak about things that had not occurred or that wouldn't occur. He wouldn't speak before. So he would actually wait for things to happen and then would want to talk about it. Since I'm a teacher, I bring a lot of material with me. Please forgive me. Mahir is, in his book, says, in one of the scholars of the era, he was a scholar, intelligent, poet, would really influence others, influential. But I would also say that this state was also apparent in Kenan el-Rifai, and that was even more powerful and more influential. We personally weren't able to see him in person, but inshallah we can actually put all his knowledge into action and act accordingly. We had a presentation full of wisdom, Gnostics, and thank you very much to all our presenters. So we started with Esma-i Husna from the Greetings of Konya, and Kenan el-Rifai's Manifestation of Love in the other presentation. And we also commemorated Merhumet Cemile, Anna Merishmel late Cemile, in companion with Samiha Ayverdi, and the honorable disposition of Kenan el-Rifai. So we would like to actually thank you very much for Tasawwuf Studies Institute for giving us such an opportunity, and to our founding mother. Are there any questions? Thank you so much. From the very beginning of my training, this is what I supported. In academic studies, as you know, love is dominant. Love predominates. Because yes, of course, we should be able to, of course, apply the requirements of academic studies, but love should prevail. So Sufi studies shouldn't be like normal, ordinary academic studies, because then the characters we are searching should not be well explained, because we have to take them as examples, we have to see how they lived. But if we just follow the chronological states of a scholar's life, we wouldn't be able to understand anything. So Eylül actually very nicely explained the states and putting in action. I would also like to talk about Sema Nur's presentation, which she prepared very nicely. So I have the pleasure of how my students turn into an academician from a housewife. And as Can Güzel Hoca knows very well, in America, the greatest professors in Sufism like Karl Ernst, are actually students of Anne-Marie Schimmel. So one can understand that not only in Turkey, but also anywhere in the world, Samiha Ayverdi's beautiful conduct, whoever carries her conduct, whoever conveys her conduct, just like a real academician who puts the best manners and conduct before other skills, this is just an outcome. Whatever collaborations we have been able to make across the world, it was actually the outcome of Samiha Ayverdi's training just one scholar, who is Anne-Marie Schimmel. So one can go everywhere, anywhere. So each one of you has got a very important task. Thank you very much. Can I say something, please, my teachers? Since I was a teacher, mine was like an academic preaching, sorry, because I was a teacher of religion. No, I didn't mean it was like that. It could be academic, but love should be in the foreground so that people can influence others. Because if you actually explain or describe the life of a Kamil insan only in chronological order, that actually eradicates the influence, the real influence. I'm sorry, two of my teachers are speaking on the other side. I will also listen to you, sorry. Vedide Hanım wants to say something. When I was reading the verses, I was under the influence and I started crying and I got upset. But now my teacher says one should actually study with love, so it's been a relief for me. Thank you very much for the papers. I have a question to Arzu Hanım, to Eylül. In a book that I read about the biography of the prophets, I read pour 7 gallons of water drawn from 7 different rivers so that I can teach what I have learned. I can read the word again. Sorry, I haven't heard this sentence, this expression before, but we would like to hear it again. That's the expression. The Prophet said, pour over me 7 gallons of water taken from 7 different waters so that I can go to my folk and teach. So some people... So this is actually probably a sign showing that after his passing away, his mission will even be more strongly going on and more prevalent. This is how I felt, but because now, for example, I can see that the Prophet's mission is still very strongly present here. So, for example, his manifestations, the Prophet's manifestation through different sources, is actually going on carrying out his task. So, how lucky we are to be a part of it. Are there any questions? Or shall we give a break until the next session? We will be serving tea and coffee. And then we will start with Atif Halil Bey's presentation. Thank you very much.
Efendim tekrar merhabalar. Hoş geldiniz tekrar. 1. Uluslararası Tasavvuf Araştırmaları Lisansüstü Öğrenci Sempozyumu'nun cumartesi günü ikinci paneline hoş geldiniz. Panelimize başlamadan evvel misafirimiz Dr. Atif Halil, dün yapmayı düşündükleri, bugüne aldıkları açılış konuşmalarını yapacaklar. Buyurun efendim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The subject that I'll be speaking about for the next 30 minutes is the subject of the near-death experience in light of Sufi metaphysics and the philosophy of Ibn al-Arabi. Somewhat of an unconventional subject to be addressing at a conference on Sufism, but perhaps not as unconventional as I thought. My own interest in near-death experiences began about more than a decade ago when I read a book by an American woman by the name of Betty Eadie about her own near-death experience. It was a gripping account of her dying and coming back to life, and then recounting what she experienced when she had died. And I just learned recently that Jamal Nur Hoja actually has some of her students read this book, and that it's been translated into Turkish. So I felt like I wasn't the only person, the only Muslim that had been deeply moved by this account. Now, the term, the near-death experience, abbreviated simply as NDE, entered into our lexicon and eventually gained currency after Raymond Moody published his book, Life After Life, in the mid-1970s, which went on to become a bestseller. It was the first systematic account to be published in English of the phenomena of seemingly returning from death or the brink of death. While it was not an academic work, and bestsellers are rarely academic works, Moody, who holds both a doctorate in philosophy and is also a physician by training, was relatively rigorous in the analysis that he brought to his study, and this at least partly allowed the work to go on to set the stage for the development of a new field of study known as near-death studies. The field has grown exponentially since Moody published his book about 40 years ago. The field that he inaugurated and of which he's the founder has now spawned hundreds of books and even more articles. Moody himself likely didn't imagine how important this book, Life After Life, would be in charting the terrain of a new field of study, centering not only around the science of death, but also consciousness, sentience, intelligence, the soul, the nature of human selfhood, and human mortality. Now, the inspiration behind Moody's own work originally lay in a talk that he attended by a certain George Ritchie, later to become Dr. George Ritchie, who had become also the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry, or the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at Towers Hospital. George Ritchie had recounted an NDE that he had had in a lecture that he gave that Moody attended. In 1943, George Ritchie had contracted pneumonia while he was stationed at an army base in Texas, shortly before he was to begin medical school. Following a period of an extremely high fever and a severe tightness of chest, George Ritchie passed away. After being officially pronounced dead by an army doctor who thoroughly examined his condition, he was covered with a sheet and prepared for the morgue. He was going to be buried. But it just so happened that a male nurse who was present was so upset by the death of George Ritchie, they were both similar in age, that he persuaded the overseeing medical officer to examine Moody again and administer an adrenaline injection to his chest near the heart. This was even though the second examination of the doctor had simply confirmed the first examination, namely that George Ritchie had died. The doctor acquiesced, perhaps because he saw how upset the young man was, the young nurse was. While the procedure was in its day unusual, namely of injecting adrenaline near the heart to hope to revive the individual, it was successful. It revived him from death, a death that lasted for 9 minutes. When he was brought back to life, it turned out that George Ritchie had remained conscious all along, and that he had unimaginable experiences while he was clinically declared dead. These included not only experiences of a profoundly religious nature, but also astral travels beyond simply the base that he had been stationed at. In fact, according to George Ritchie's own account, he had a hard time returning to the body, to his body, because the body was covered with a sheet and he couldn't figure out where his body was. He was only able to recognize his body when he had this out-of-body experience because his hand was protruding out of the body and he saw the ring, his fraternity ring, and he said, "That's me." Return to the body. Now, Ritchie was reluctant to speak about the near-death experience that he had because it was so fantastic. He thought people would think he was insane and maybe institute him in a psychiatric ward. And so he didn't talk about the near-death experience until many years later, eventually going on to deliver lectures on the subject, which Raymond Moody attended, and also eventually going to write a book about it called Return from Tomorrow. Now, Ritchie's experience was one of the first most comprehensive accounts in modern history, at least in English, of what we now refer to as the near-death experience, an experience of seemingly returning from death. Now, while there are quite a few definitions of the term, that of Bruce Grayson, who's one of the leading figures in the field of near-death experiences, is quite concise. According to Grayson, and I quote, "Near-death experiences are profoundly psychological events with transcendental and mystical elements, typically occurring to individuals close to death or in situations of intense physical or emotional danger." Or in the words of Pim van Lommel, another near-death researcher or near-death experience researcher, a cardiologist by training, and the author of a recent book, Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience, which I think should be translated into Turkish if it hasn't already been translated. In my opinion, it's the best comprehensive summary of the near-death experience to have been published so far. In the words of Pim van Lommel, a near-death experience is the reported recollection of all of the impressions gained during a special state of consciousness, which includes some specific elements, such as witnessing a tunnel, a light, a panoramic life review, deceased parents, or one's own resuscitation. According to Pim van Lommel, near-death experiences are most frequently reported during cases of brain impairment, such as cardiac arrest. Now, while Ritchie's experience was, as I noted, one of the earliest and most comprehensive near-death experience accounts to be published in recent history, his experience was not as rare as you might think. According to a Gallup poll, at least 5% of Americans have had some kind of near-death experience in their life. Another study found that the number of near-death experiencers in the United States is about 9 million. According to a similar study or a survey that was conducted in Germany, 4.2% of the German population has had near-death experiences. Now, we don't have similar studies of populations outside of Europe and North America, so it's difficult to compare. But the high percentage of near-death experiences in North America and Europe may be at least partly attributed to the advancements in medical technology that allows for resuscitation and revival of patients or individuals that are close to death. Now, researchers who have examined near-death experiences have found that there are a number of elements or components to the near-death experience. Not everyone has all of the elements or ingredients. Many have some of them, some have many of them, some have all of them. Now, what are these ingredients that make up the near-death experience? Well, there's first of all the out-of-body experience. 3 in 4 individuals who have near-death experiences have what is called the out-of-body experience, where they actually see themselves leaving the body or have an experience of leaving the body in much the same way that you take off a coat that you're wearing. And despite the loss of the body, there's a sense of consciousness, there are emotions, there's an acute state of awareness. Many near-death experiencers are actually quite surprised to find they're still alive. So there's a surprise element or factor in the out-of-body component of the near-death experience. Often these out-of-body experiences take place in hospital settings. Sometimes they take place on accident scenes where a person will look at the body from a vantage point which would suggest that the imaginal body or the soul is hovering above the body, looking down. Sometimes they'll look at the body of themselves and they'll think, oh, what a poor fellow. And then they'll realize, oh, this is me. And why am I not in my body? And there's a confusion that might follow. And sometimes the out-of-body experience might take place simply in one's home, in a medical emergency, if one gets sick and then passes out. You also have the tunnel experience. 1 in 3 near-death experiencers have an experience of going through a tunnel. They'll see a light in the distance, and then the light will begin to grow, and soon they'll find themselves traveling through a tunnel. Sometimes they're accompanied by other beings of light. Sometimes they're accompanied by a guide of sorts. Sometimes there are other souls that are traveling through the tunnel that they don't recognize. Sometimes the tunnel is an extremely peaceful experience of extreme serenity, but where they feel themselves traveling even faster than the speed of light. Sometimes during the journey through the tunnel, there are sacred chants or prayers or music, sacred music that they hear in the distance. Like I said, 1 in 3 near-death experiencers have the tunnel experience. Then there's probably the most interesting component of the near-death experience, and this is the life review. More than 1 in 5 people who have a near-death experience have what is called the life review, where you see your whole life played out before you in all of its details. And you see it with a kind of hyper-clarity, every single thing that you have done. And not only that, but you experience your life on the receiving end of the people that you interacted with. So you experience the joy that you brought into other people's lives. You experience the pain that you brought into other people's lives. And the experience is magnified exponentially. So the joy is magnified exponentially, and the pain is magnified exponentially. If it's physical pain you caused, then you experience the physical pain. If it's psychic or emotional pain that you caused, you experience the psychic or emotional pain. There's also a third element to the life review, and that is that you see your life from a very objective point of view. So you recognize your own self-deceptions, your rationalizations of courses of action that you know you shouldn't be doing. But in the world, you can delude yourself, you can deceive yourself. But in the life review, that option is not available. You're seeing your life from a third-person point of view and with a kind of objectivity. And usually there's shame and guilt associated with recognizing one's own self-deceptions. Then you also have meetings with celestial beings, with angelic beings, often meetings with deceased relatives. More than 57% of people who have the near-death experience have encounters with these other beings, beings of light, sometimes guardian-like figures or guide-like figures. There are also some encounters with demonic beings, which I'll come to shortly. Then you also have entry into unearthly realms, which might include glimpses of paradise. Often there are cities of light. Often there are also there's sacred architecture that one might experience or see. So the entry into these paradisial realms or higher worlds. And then you have the encounter with the light. 65% of people who have a near-death experience what they believe is the light of God. And they say that in the presence of this light, they experience a love that they've never experienced before. It's quite funny to read about some of these experiences because you'll have someone who encountered this light and then they don't want to go back to their spouse because they've never felt this kind of love before, not even in their marriage. They don't want to go back at all because they've never experienced such pure love in the presence of this light. Usually the only time they come back, sometimes they're given a choice. You can stay or you can go back. And then the only time they go back, they never go back because of love, of romantic love. They only go back because of some responsibility. So a mother feels a maternal responsibility for her child, or a child feels a responsibility for their parents who is elderly and they need to be taken care of. But I've never read a near-death experience account where someone wants to go back to their romantic lover because what the experience of love makes that romantic love like straw, seem like straw. So there's this experience of the light. Now these are just a few of the elements or the components of the near-death experience. Now the question that is being asked is nowadays, is the near-death experience real? or is it hallucinatory? That's what researchers are debating. Now, skeptics argue that the near-death experience is simply a coping mechanism of the brain. It's a hallucination for the brain to deal with the trauma of death. The brain is confronted with its own mortality, and so it produces fantastic images to cushion the experience of dying, the trauma of death. The brain goes haywire, so you experience angelic beings, beings of light, guides, celestial realms like you've never seen before, a light that represents God. That's the skeptical argument. Now, this would be, or seem like a convincing argument, were it not for a number of factors. First of all, not everyone who has a near-death experience has a pleasant experience. There are many people who have very traumatic experiences. There are experiences of hell realms. There are experiences of demonic beings. There was one near-death experience of an art professor in the United States by the name of Howard Strom, and he was, by his own confession, an atheist. And he said that in his near-death experience, he was being eaten alive by demons. And in the middle of this grueling, tortuous experience, he heard a voice from the depths of his soul, and it said, "Pray." And he thought, I've never prayed in my life. I don't even remember, I don't even know how to pray. But the voice said again, "Pray." And as soon as he began to say the name of God, he said that the demons, they shrieked in anguish and pain. It was like boiling oil had been poured on the demons once they heard the name of God. And then he said he saw a light in the distance, and the light grew, and that light was an angelic being, and that came and rescued him. And Christ also came to his rescue in this near-death experience. He eventually abandoned his professorship and became a Unitarian minister. So he abandoned academia. So not everyone has pleasant experiences. So the skeptic's argument that this is a coping mechanism to deal with the trauma of death doesn't make sense, because why would the brain produce an even more traumatic experience to deal with the trauma of death? But even more problematic is that the skeptic's argument is premised on the idea that the brain is the center of human personality and consciousness. But the problem here is that in many near-death experiences, the near-death experience takes place in a hospital setting. And in cases where it takes place in a hospital setting, brain activity is being monitored. And in many of these cases, there's no brain activity. There's a flat EEG reading. The EEG machine records electroencephalogram. It's the electroencephalogram machine. It records brain activity. And so if there's no EEG reading, then the brain can't be producing images. And if the skeptic believes that the brain is the center of consciousness, then how is it that you're having this fantastic experience when the brain is comatose? So that's another problem with the skeptic's argument. In the words of Jeffrey Long, the author of a recent book, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, it is medically inexplicable to have a highly organized and lucid experience while unconscious or clinically dead. Another problem with the skeptical argument is that you also have the out-of-body component. And in many of the cases of the out-of-body component of the near-death experience, in the out-of-body component, they will see things from a vantage point that they could not have seen unless they were actually hovering above the body or traveling around. In other words, there were no things, there was no way they could have known if they were simply lying on the surgery table. In one study that was conducted of the out-of-body experiences of 93 NDEers, or people who had a near-death experience, 86% of what they claimed to have seen when the soul was floating around was confirmed by third parties. And the other 14% wasn't proven to be false, there was no way to verify it. And so the out-of-body component of the near-death experience might provide us with the strongest empirical evidence for the fact that the near-death experience could be a very real experience. And some of the most fascinating research that's been done on the out-of-body component of the near-death experience is of the out-of-body experiences of the blind during the near-death experience. Kevin Ring, who was a leading researcher in the field of near-death studies until his retirement, he used to teach at the University of Connecticut. He published an entire book called Mindsight, where he studied the near-death experiences of blind people, and he found that during the out-of-body component, they have sight. And in some cases, they regain sight from having lost it at some point in their life. In some cases, they have sight, never having had sight before. It's a confusing experience for them to finally see for the first time, and yet they're able to describe things that one could only describe if they were hovering above the body and they had sight. So you'll have, for example, the case of an elderly lady, and this is one of his examples, who during the near-death experience, the out-of-body component experience, she described surgical tools that were being used on her with a precision that was impossible, and other things that were going on in the room. You also have quite a bit of research that's been done on the near-death experiences of children. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was one of the figures in the forefront of this area of study. She was a professor at the University of Chicago. She studied the stages of dying. Now she found that in the near-death experiences of children, when they meet relatives or loved ones, they always meet deceased relatives. And she argued that if it is a hallucination, then they should meet their parents in the near-death experience. But it's always a deceased person. It's never someone who's alive. In some cases, they'll meet deceased people that they don't even know of, but it turns out that this person's a deceased relative. So there was one case that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mentioned of a 12-year-old girl who claimed to have met her older brother, but the problem was she had no older brother, or at least not one that she was aware of. But it later turned out that she did have an older brother whose death the parents had never told her about. So that's the kind of research that's been done on the near-death experiences of children. Now, I have here an account of a near-death experience, which I'll actually read, just to give you an idea of what goes on in the near-death experience. This is a full account. And I share this one because it's the only near-death experience I found of a Turkish NDE. It's Khalil's NDE, an account from Turkey. And it has many of the components that I talked about. So Khalil says in this account, I was picking up my daughter from school. While I was walking there, I dropped to the floor. I was having a heart attack. I was walking in a pretty populous area, so there were many people around. However, no one seemed to do anything. A few younger boys walked by and just watched as I was lying on the ground. A young girl who was maybe 5 years old noticed me since I had collapsed right outside of her apartment complex. She asked me if I was all right, but I couldn't say anything anymore. She went back inside. Everything went black. I will never be able to remember how long it was that I could not see anything, but all of a sudden I realized my eyes were open. There was one thing that didn't make sense. Why was I floating? I was in the same spot that I had collapsed, but I was slightly higher up. Suddenly I heard sirens and looked down. I could see an ambulance with people coming out. They were putting me on a stretcher. I heard one man say, "This man has no chance of survival. He has been here without any help for nearly an hour." The other man said, "I'm sure he's already dead. I didn't realize it was this bad." I could see everything so clearly. So he has this out-of-body experience. I wasn't feeling any pain and actually felt very comfortable. However, I was a bit stressed at the thought of my daughter and my wife, who would be stressed to find out that I had died. I didn't know where my daughter was, but I knew that my wife's work was not too far, so I went to her workplace. In the out-of-body experience, he travels to his wife's work. I went to her office, but she wasn't there. I saw that her computer screen was on and that she had been looking at an Istanbul real estate page with apartments and houses for sale. I didn't think much of it at the time, but this did have significance later on in my story. I became curious. What would happen if I continued to float up? I began to go up, up, up, up. Finally, I could see the entire city of Samsun. As I started to rise, I could see the Black Sea and the southern tip of the Ukraine, which is geographically close to Samsun. Eventually, I could see all of Turkey and Ukraine, then all of Eurasia. I kept going up so high that I was eventually able to view the whole Earth from outer space. Suddenly, it was total black. I couldn't see anything. I started to panic and yelled, "Hello." I didn't get a response. Then I called out to God, to a higher power, and suddenly I saw immense light. I was able to float towards that light. As I entered, I realized I was getting sucked into some kind of vortex. Then I was in a cave or a tunnel. I could see the same light, but it was at the end of the tunnel. I started to float towards that light, and I came closer and closer. As I got to the end with the door, I came to a door. The door had typical Islamic ornamentation on it. The door opened and it looked absolutely dark. However, this was only for a few seconds. Afterwards, I had an entire life review. So the life review component now comes in. From when I was in my mother's womb all the way to the present day. I was shown many life events that I had forgotten. Some of them made me feel happy, while others filled me with guilt, sadness, sorrow, and so on. Next, I saw a nice meadow with green grass that was greener than I could have ever imagined. It had flowers and colors that I could not describe. I went inside the house and I saw a young man who was sitting. As soon as he saw me, he stood up and ran towards me. He looked similar to my father, but I couldn't tell if it was him. This man was visually younger than I was. I asked him who he was. He told me that he was my grandfather. So this is now the meeting with the deceased relatives. Ever since I had known him, he was always in a wheelchair. So I was surprised to see him so youthful and radiant. He asked me to say hi to my grandmother, his wife, who was still alive. Then he asked me if I wanted to see my deceased father. We talked for about 5 minutes. In the distance, I saw my father. When we got closer, he welcomed me with open arms. He told me that I'd been a good person, but I needed to make sure my daughter would never lose her religion. My grandfather, father, and myself were walking along a field, and we saw a beautiful mosque in the distance. So now you have the celestial architecture, the sacred architecture. So they see a mosque in the distance. As we got closer, I could feel my walking become more and more difficult. It felt as though I had gained all this extra weight. They entered, but I could not. So his grandfather and father entered this mosque, but he's not able to go in. I could feel myself being pulled back. I heard an authoritative voice say, "You shall not enter. You have not finished your life. When you have completed your life and continue to be a good person, you will earn your place here." So this is another component of the near-death experience. People are told, it's not your time. You must go back. Suddenly I saw complete darkness. Then I opened my eyes and realized I was in the hospital bed. So from the time he had passed out, he's now in the hospital bed. And I was with my wife and my daughter, and they were crying. Apparently I was out for longer than most cardiac patients are. And it was a miracle that I survived. I felt pain, but I was not tired or drowsy. Visiting hours had been over, and my wife and daughter had to go home. After I recovered, I revealed exactly what happened. My wife had a hard time believing it at first. She thought he was hallucinating. But I told her about the fact that when I went to her office, I saw the real estate, the Istanbul real estate apartment and house website at her desk. She was shocked. She said that day her boss had offered her a job in Istanbul, and she was wondering what kinds of apartments and houses exist there if she planned to relocate for her job. She said she had never looked at that site before and thought there was no way I could have known that information until I had actually been there. I hadn't been to her office in over 2 months. The experience was timeless and vivid. So here you have the out-of-body experience where it's confirmed what he saw, which suggests that it was a real experience, not just a hallucination in the hospital. Now, the evidence that suggests that near-death experiences are real is overwhelming. And the cumulative weight of this evidence is actually hard to deny. I've only scratched the surface of near-death experiences in my talk. It's a very large subject. In fact, most people who specialize in the study of near-death experiences, not just your average biologist or psychologist, people who actually specialize in the field of near-death experiences actually believe it's a real phenomenon. But before I turn to address how to approach the near-death experience from the vantage point of Sufi metaphysics, I want to note that there are 2 groups that have been very resistant to accepting near-death experiences as genuine phenomena of the first stages of the afterlife, or genuine glimpses into the first stages of the afterlife. The first group that's resistant to accepting near-death experiences are scientific materialists, those who subscribe to a worldview in which only matter exists, and for whom consciousness is nothing more than a byproduct of brain activity, those for whom consciousness is nothing more than what's referred to as an epiphenomena. This group's resistance comes from tenaciously holding on to a worldview that leaves no room for the soul, no room for life after death, no room for the survival of consciousness, no room for a world of spirits, let alone room for final judgment and an immaterial God. The late Houston Smith referred to this group as not fundamentalists, but fundamaterialists, because they have a kind of dogmatic adherence to the postulates of materialism. The second resistance, interestingly, comes from what we might call religious exclusivists, those who believe that there's no way to God outside of their own religion, or those who believe that there's only one way to God. Particularly challenging for religious exclusivists is that the sacred imagery that's encountered by near-death experiencers does not conform to the symbolic repertoire of their own religions, but reflects instead the religious imagery of the diverse religions of the world. Usually in the case of near-death experiences, the near-death experiencer experiences religious imagery from the religion that is closest to home. So Jews, when they have near-death experiences, might encounter the patriarchs, Abraham or Jacob or Isaac. They might encounter rabbinic authorities. They might encounter Yahweh. When Christians have near-death experiences, they encounter Jesus often. When Hindus have near-death experiences, they might encounter Krishna. When Buddhists have near-death experiences, they might encounter the cosmic Buddha. When indigenous Americans or Native Americans have near-death experiences, they might encounter ancestors. They might encounter sacred landscapes. The symbolism that they'll experience is unique to the Native American religion. And so the topography of the afterlife always corresponds in a very general sense to the notions of the afterlife that are part of the religion of the near-death experiencer or the religion that is closest to home. It might even be the religion that one is abandoned or left as an agnostic or an atheist. And also challenging for religious exclusivists is that near-death experiencers are never told that there's only one way to God or that there's only one religion that they must adhere to fulfill their life's purpose. And so this elicits a kind of knee-jerk reaction in immediate rejection of the near-death experience based not on analysis of the data, but because it undermines their own theological worldview in the same way that materialists will reject near-death experiences because it undermines their own worldview. Religious exclusivists, especially when they're of a Christian stripe, and I've read many near-death experiences, and usually when they're of a Christian stripe, at least in the United States or Canada, are often pleased with the near-death experiences of their own co-religionists because they're seeing images that they would expect them to see, but they're equally troubled by the near-death experiences of members of other faiths because no one is told that you must become a Christian to fulfill your life purpose. So it can be irksome for religious exclusivists. It confirms some aspects of their beliefs, namely that there's a life after death, but it doesn't confirm other aspects of their belief, namely that there's only one way to God. Now, how are we to make sense of the near-death experience from the vantage point of Islamic thought? For this, we must turn not to kalam, or dogmatic theology, or even exoteric theology, but to the Islamic contemplative and sapiential tradition, particularly as it's embodied in Islamic philosophy, Sufi metaphysics, and the thought of Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi's understanding about the nature of reality, the nature of the afterlife, the nature of God's multiple self-revelations provides us with a perspective that can make sense of the phenomena in a way that no single prevailing theology today seems to be capable of. There isn't a theology that I know of outside of Ibn Arabi's theology that can actually make sense of the near-death experience. To begin with, the afterlife for Ibn Arabi, in line with the general Islamic tradition, begins with the barzakh, as many of you already know. The barzakh is an intermediary zone between life as we know it and the afterlife. And the afterlife from which no return is possible, from which you can't even have a near-death experience. Ibn Arabi says that entering into the barzakh is like waking up from a dream. And then going from the barzakh into the afterlife is like waking up from another dream. So this world is like a dream within a dream, the barzakh is like a dream, and then the afterlife is like wakefulness. So you go from one wakefulness to another stage of wakefulness. It's this intermediary realm. But what are we to make of the near-death experiences of the religious symbols of other faiths? Well, for this, our entry point should be the Hadith of Muslim that Ibn Arabi gives us a commentary of in the Meccan revelations. There's a hadith found in Sahih Muslim, a somewhat cryptic hadith, that you'll never hear the ulama talking about, but it's in Sahih Muslim. And in this hadith, according to the hadith, God will appear before different groups in the afterlife. And each group will deny the form of God or the form that God assumes because they don't recognize this particular form. In the hadith, God will appear and say, I am your Lord. And they will say, we seek refuge in you from God. And then Ibn Arabi says that God will ask them for a mark through which they can recognize God, their God. They will reveal the mark, and then God will reveal himself in the form that they recognize. The word that he uses is tahawwul. What Ibn Arabi's reading of this hadith implies is that while God remains an eternal mystery with respect to his essence, with respect to the manifest side of God, God takes on and assumes a variety of forms, each of which then becomes the basis of a particular conception of God. And these conceptions of God then become the basis of the various theological traditions of the world, each of which is based on an authentic experience of the tajalli, or God's revelation. So when a Hindu encounters Krishna, when a Christian encounters Christ, when a Jewish person encounters Yahweh, when a Buddhist encounters the cosmic Buddha, these are all tajalliyat, in a sense, of ultimate reality, which transcends all formal limitations. And so Ibn Arabi writes in a passage in the Bezels of Wisdom, which you might already be familiar with, he says, no individual can escape having a belief about God or about his Lord. Through it he resorts to him and seeks him. When the real, or al-haq, discloses himself to him in his belief, he recognizes and acknowledges him. But if he discloses himself to him in other than his belief, he denies him and he seeks refuge from him, thus displaying discourtesy towards the actual situation, though he himself supposes that he has shown courtesy. And in the Meccan Revelations, Ibn Arabi makes a similar claim. He says, every group has believed something about God. If he discloses himself in other than that something, they will deny him. But when he discloses himself in the mark which this group have established with God in themselves, then they will acknowledge him, just like the hadith of Muslim. But Ibn Arabi is not content simply to make a statement about the nature of God, the nature of reality. He also states that it is incumbent upon one to be able to recognize God's multiple self-revelations. This is why in the previous passage that I studied, Ibn Arabi says that the denial of God when he appears in a form that one does not recognize actually reflects discourtesy towards God. Because it is to deny a form simply that one is not familiar with. And so he warns those who have high spiritual ambitions from confining themselves to one particular belief of God. He says, beware of becoming bound to a specific knotting or aqd or belief and disbelieving in everything else, lest great good escape you. Be in yourself a hayal for the forms of all beliefs, for God is wider and more tremendous than that he should be constricted by one knotting rather than another, for he says, whithersoever you turn, there is the face of God. So he says, don't confine yourself simply to one aqd. Aqd becomes the basis of the Arabic word for creed, which is aqidah. Aqidah is usually translated as creed. Now it comes from a root which means to bind, because what you're doing is you're binding what is infinite to one particular form. So he says, don't bind God just to one form, because then you can't recognize God when he appears in another form. And so the human being must be able to, as he says, become a hayal for all forms. And this, he says, is the quality of the muhaqqiqun, or the verifiers. In a beautiful passage in the Meccan Revelations, Ibn Arabi writes that the science of the sects and the creeds is a science which the person of faith need not study nor consider. In other words, the common person doesn't have to familiarize themselves with all the theologies of the world. But it is incumbent upon the folk of God, the Ahl Allah, to know the doctrine of every sect and creed concerning God in order to witness him in every form, and in order not to stand in the place of denial, for he permeates existence. So no one denies him except those who are limited. But the folk of God, or Allah, follow him whose folk they are, so his property flows over them, and his property is the lack of limitation. Hence he possesses all-pervading being, while they, the verifiers, possess all-pervading shuhud. So because God is infinite, his forms are infinite in wujud, and the verifier has an infinite receptivity. So his witnessing is infinite of God's multiple self-revelations. To conclude, in order to make sense of the near-death experience, especially of the various experiences of God, one has to approach these experiences from the vantage point of the muhaqqiqin, of the verifiers. Even if one is not from among the ranks of the verifiers, the knowledge that Ibn Arabi shares with us brings about God's multiple self-revelations can help us make sense of and unravel a phenomena the study of a phenomenon that's been growing over the last few decades, the near-death experience. In this respect, the timelessness of Ibn Arabi's ideas and Sufi metaphysics in general cannot be underestimated. One of the most remarkable features of near-death experiences is that they seem to provide us with an empirical basis for belief in life after death. It is probably the strongest empirical evidence that we have that consciousness survives death. And yet the nature of the afterlife with near-death experiences give us a glimpse of can only be appreciated by a theological system or a theology that is not straitjacketed by religious exclusivism. The only theology that can make sense of the near-death experience, therefore, is not a theology, but a meta-theology, one that can embrace, integrate, and situate other theologies within its own scope. And Ibn Arabi's theology provides us with precisely such a framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. We will now continue to the second panel of our day. So if I could please have our panelists come up. Şimdi direkt ikinci oturumumuza geçeceğiz efendim. Panelistlerimizi sahneye davet ediyorum. Buyurun lütfen.
And so we'll begin with our first presentation by Elvida Unal, who will be speaking about the Naqshbandiya in China, with a specific focus on the Jahriya and the Khafiya suborders of the Naqshbandiya.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a very great honor for me to speak Turkey. It's my beloved country, but I want to speak in English today. I will talk about Chinese Muslims, Chinese Sufis, and the Naqshbandis in China, which is my also PhD thesis. But before this, everyone who meets with me, they ask how and why I study in China Sufism, because it's very far away from Islamic countries and far from the Ummah, as we see. But for my inspiration, I took three very important quotes from a hadith, from Ibn Arabi, and from a Turkish Sufi master. The first one is in the famous hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that seek knowledge even in China. Many scholars, they claim that the China here, it is represented, it's very far away from the farthest place in the world, as they know at that time. But some scholars, they said that in China, there must be something, the hikmah, that we Muslims, we need to take and we hold, we study about it. The other one is the great Sufi metaphysician, Ibn Arabi. He says that in China, the latest Insan-ı Kamil will be born and he will speak Chinese language. So it gives me inspired a lot. And another one, the Imam Rabbani, one of the greatest Sufi master of Naqshbandiya, and another one from Turkey, Gaus al-Kasravi. They said that among the mazhabs, the Hanafi, and among the tariqas, the Naqshbandiya, will be last until the latest time. So when I combine, then when I combine these three quotes, it makes me amazed really, because there is a China, there is Naqshbandi, and there is the latest İnsan-ı Kamil. So I thought that we need to search about it. But when we study about China and Chinese Sufism, we encounter some problems in the academic world. The first of all, as we know that when we talk about China and Chinese academics, we need to add a Chinese style. For example, Chinese style communism, Chinese style socialism, because it's the China from all of its aspects is very different from the other parts of the world, as we know. Another problem is some academics, they said that the Muslims in China is a very small group, so marginalized, so we don't need to take care of them. And some academics, they said that the Muslims in China and the Sufis, they are so Islamic, there is no difference with the other parts of the Muslims, so we don't need to take care also, we don't need to study. But some scholars, they claim that the Muslims in China, they are overly Sinicized, overly to be Chinese. Already we cannot differentiate with the Chinese non-Muslims. So we don't need to claim that they are Muslims. They already lose their Muslim identity. The other problem is, in China, if you know about the Chinese language and Chinese society, some definitions are not very clear. For example, the religion, nationality. When we speak about nationality, they don't understand as we understand. It's very different concepts. Before my dissertation about Naqshbandi, I want to give some backgrounds. In China, today, according to official reports, we have more than 23 million Muslims. The half of them, they follow traditional Islam, as we said in Chinese, Qadimo. The word comes from the Arabic word, Qadim. The 1/4 of this, they follow the Ihwani. It comes from the Ihwan, the Arabic word. And this movement inspired the Wahhabi movement. But it's not totally Wahhabi, we cannot say. Because Wahhabi is Hanbali, but this movement is Hanafi. And another 1/4 of the Muslims, they follow Naqshbandiye, Kubreviye, Kalenderiye, or Kadriye, some Sufi orders. But in China, we call them Menhuan, not sub-orders or Tariqa. And about Naqshbandi, we assume that we have more than 1 million followers of Naqshbandiye, the Khafiya and Jahriya, the two sub-orders in China. I think here everybody knows about what is Naqshbandi, so I don't want to give more information, but I want to emphasize a characteristic of Naqshbandi. That is to join politics, to join society, because as we know that some other tariqas, they are trying to be away from politics, away from society, away from the worldly life. But Naqshbandi very emphasized to join politics to protect Muslims. And they gain wealth to protect Muslims also, because they think that if we don't join politics, or we don't have wealth enough, the non-Muslims or some not good Muslims can be over us and they can suppress us. And in terms of Chinese Naqshbandi, we have two main sub-orders. One came from the Central Asia, the Mujaddidiya way. The other one came from the Yemen. We cannot say it is completely Mujaddidi or completely not Khalidi or something. But when we speak about Naqshbandi in China, it's equals to Islam in China, because the Naqshbandis had a great power on Islamic history in China, and they played a great role, Islamization, and to be Sufi in Chinese Muslims. Here I prepared a Sufi lineage, a silsila. of Chinese Muslims from the Central Asia. But I don't want to give more detail because of time. But here, the most important one is Hoca Ahrar, as we know, Ubaydullah Ahrar. He opened a new era in the Sufi understanding because he said that we need to gain wealth, we need to join politics, and he was governing a huge territory, huge wealth. After him, the Muhammad Yusuf and Ahmed Kasani. We know Ahmed Kasani, the Kasaniye way in Naqshbandi. And the descendants of Kasaniye, they played a very, very important role in the Uyghur area and the inner China. One of them is Ishaq Veli, as we can see. He is the founder of the Ishaqiye way, a new suborder in the Naqshbandi way. Another one is the Hoca Afak. But the followers of Hoca Afak and the followers of the Ishaq Hoca, they were like enemy, and they were killed each other. It's very interesting, I think, because in the Sufi history, it's very rare to see two Sufi groups in the same order killed each other and poisoned each other. This silsila, this Sufi lineage came from the Yemen. How? Because some of a follower of the Afaki, Hoca Afak, he went to Yemen, but at that time, as we know, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and some new neo-Orthodox ideas came existence. So when he went to Yemen, he encountered a Naqshbandi Sufi master, and he said, we need to change some way, understanding of Sufism. After he came back to China, he denied Afaki and he denied to do silent zikr. Because as we know, the Naqshbandis, they are doing silent zikr, Hufi zikr, or we can say. But he said that this Ma Mingxin here, he said that we need to do a vocal zikr and we need to be away from tombs, as in Turkish we say mezar or türbe. We don't need to do rabta to saints. And he said that this kind of the veneration of saints, visiting tombs, these kind of things, there is no place in the Islamic understanding. Here in China, and Chinese definitions are very complex because if there is something, you can find many names of it. For example, the Ishaqiye, or the two Naqshbandi suborder, it has White Mountain, it has name. And the Afaki has many names also, Black Mountain, Hufiye, or Old Teaching. And the Jehriye, the Ma Mingxin ways, has New Teaching, the name. This photo, I love it very much because it's from the last decade of the 19th century. And here we can see some Hufiye followers. They are doing khatme, as we know in Turkey now, or they are doing some silent zikr. And they are very emphasizing veneration of saints, seeking inspiration in the tombs. But the other photo, at the same time, they are doing vocal zikr, the Hafi zikr. And we can see that they are very resembling the Qadiriye, or as we know now in Turkey, some Halveti Jehriye, this kind of things. But there's a very interesting thing. In China, Chinese Sufi Muslims, they combine with the martial arts, Kung Fu, and the Sufi zikr. Here we can see a Sufi master here. He is doing martial arts, Kung Fu here, but at the same time he is using his breath to do zikr. Why they do it? Because at that time, because of the Chinese government's policy, they try to suppress all of the Muslims and all of the Sufi orders. And since the Yuan dynasty, the Hui Muslims, Chinese-speaking Muslims, they are very well known to good at martial arts. They have very strong body, they have very nice martial arts skill. And they combine with the zikir and the martial arts. I think it's a very interesting thing because in Turkey we cannot see this kind of things. This one is the Mazı Ping. You can search it. He's very famous. And my argument, some Chinese academics, some Muslims, even some non-Muslims, they said that Sufi orders in China, they slowed the spread of Islam in China. But I think that through my fieldwork and through my experience in China, I found that especially the Naqshbandis have played a great role to unify the Muslim community because they made jihad together against the Chinese government. They unified all of them. And they were against the total Sinicization of the Islamic community, Islamic identity, because I think that, I claim that if there is not a Chinese Sufi orders, the Muslims in China must be very, very overly Sinicized now, overly Chinese now. And I think here we can see the map. Here, the most of Muslims, they were living in the northwest of China. Here, the Uyghur area, and here the Hui Muslims, the Chinese-speaking Muslims, and the most conservative Muslims, they are living there because the Sufi orders, they are still very active, and they are doing very actively zikir. They have a very nice community there. And they are maintaining the traditional madrasa system. And many of them can speak Arabic and Persian. But the other parts of Muslims here or here, they cannot speak Arabic or Persian, and they don't know the traditional madrasa system. I want to show you some pictures from the nowadays. How Naqshband is now in China. Okay. Here we can see the Jahriya Sufis. They are doing the Jahri zikir. Here we can see some Hafiya, the followers of Hafiya. They are doing Hafi zikir in their tombs. And it's very interesting architecture. It's characteristic of Chinese Muslims. This one is Ma Mingxin tomb, who is the founder of the Jahriya, and this one is the founder of the Hafiyas, his tomb. Okay.
Thank you very much. Our next presentation is by Ajmal Hanif. He will be speaking about an evolution in Tijaniya perceptions of the Jawahir al-Ma'ani. He is a PhD student in Bavaria, Germany.
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Değerli hazirun, Esselamu Aleyküm ve Rahmetullahi ve Berekatuhu. Ben konuşmamı İngilizce olarak hazırlamıştım ve İngilizce olarak konuşacağım diyordum ama İstanbul gibi güzel bir şehirde ve böylesine güzel dinleyicilerin huzurunda Türkçe dışında başka bir dille konuşmak saygısızlık olsa gerek. Bunun için Türkçe konuşacağım. Bir taraftan bunu da söyleyeyim, tek sebebi bu değildi. Söyleyeceklerimin bir kısmına belki Atıf Hoca'nın hoşuna gitmez. Sonra da sorularıyla sıkıştırır beni. Onun için de özellikle Türkçe konuşmaya çalışacağım.
After words, and that's why I will try my best to speak in Turkish. So far, we have listened presentations about the combining aspects of Sufism. We talked about love, we talked about feelings, But Sufism is not only of that, and my professors would, of course, know it better than me. Sufism also has a separating aspect. But of course, before going into that, let me say one thing. I do it out of profession. It is not because I am against Sufism or the Sufis. The combining, the unifying aspect of Sufism, I believe, is articulated by Rumi the best. Basa basa, come no matter who you are, worship whomever you want. You can be a murshik, but the door of Sufism is not one of hopelessness. It is not a realm of hopelessness, and each and every one might find himself there. Yes, we understand that, but on the other hand, unfortunately, Sufism has an aspect of separation. Looking into the history of Islam, it has been from time to time accepted and recognized, and from some other time to others denied. And that's why there is the good, there is the bad, there is the acceptable, there is the recognizable. Not only the opposing ones, but also some other sociologists exiled some Sufis, or killed them, or burned them, or their books or their works were burnt down. And please do not get me wrong, I am only talking about those as it is related with my profession. There is an order called Tijanis, and Tijanism is known by many, and I talked to Atif Hoca about Ahmed Mujannet and about Tijanis. He will be writing a book, and this will be bringing about a new perspective to our already rich literature. And my presentation is an evolution in Tijani perception of Jawahir al-Ma'ani. I will briefly talk about Tijanis and also the transformation. What kind of evolution have they gone through? In the second half of the 18th century, Tijanis came into existence with Ahmed al-Tijani's initiation, and it is still considered to be the most dominant order of Africa. According to some resources, the number of the followers go all the way up to about 100,000, and you have the chance to talk to Tijanis all across the world. In the first years of Republic, we had them in Turkey as well. I don't know if we have any of them remaining still in Turkey. Yes, there are some of them. Yes, according to Professor, there are some Tijanis in Turkey currently as well. So Jawahir al-Ma'ani, what it is, if you will, it is the holy book of Tijanis and Tijaniya. In Sufis, there is a belief. Sufi sheikhs from time to time with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, meet and they negotiate and get instructions from him. Sometimes it happens through dreams, and sometimes it is taking place in person during the daylight. And according to the founders, Ahmed Al-Tijani from time to time was meeting the Prophet Muhammad, and he, according to the resources, took the instructions from the Prophet to establish that order. And according to Tijani's, the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave the order, and there is a book that the founder wrote, and according to Tijani resources, Prophet Muhammad said, Jawahir Al-Mani is my book, and I am the author of that. And that's why each and every sentence, each and every word, every passage in the book is deemed to be written by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and with no doubt it's, of course, deemed reliable. And then why the opposing parties questioned the existence of Tijanis. In the book, there reads a sentence, Salat al-Fatih. There is a sentence that sends the salam to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This of Salat and Salam, and we know it because of our religion. And when the name of Prophet is mentioned, those who do not send the Salatu Salam to him can be the mean. And 6,000 So mentioning his name would correspond to 6,000 Quran khatms, and the value to take out of it is tantamount to that. And in the book, every word, every sentence, as I said before, is believed to be true because it was written by the Prophet. But in the 19th century, Tijanis always had the Sufis against them in North Africa and in West Africa. And Qadiris, they were. It is not difficult to stand by such a belief against the Sufis, because Tijanis, because they all also approximately believe in the same thing. If you ask me according to what I say so, one, I can say a Tijani can easily say, not in his dream, but during the daylight, he took it from the Prophet. A Qadiri Sufi may take it, but the problem arises in the 20th century when the Salafis in the villages, when they started to dominate the villages landscape of Africa, and mostly in North Africa. So the Salafis' perspective on religion is totally different compared to Sufis. My professors are here. They are literarists, and they have an approach of literalism to religion and hadith. But the Sufis like a metaphorical approach, and it goes more in line with their understanding and perception of religion and hadith. When you tell them that our sheikh took it from the Muhammad, they say, no way, who's your sheikh and how could you claim such a thing? I only believe in Quran and Hadith, they say, as long as you don't bring proof to me from them, you have no value. And before our Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, he said, I will be leaving two resources for you. As long as you hold on to them, you won't digress from truth. One is Quran and the other one is the Hadith, the Sunnah. So the Salafi wouldn't maybe believe that, but gradually Africa started to go under the influence of Salafism, and they felt the need to review their resources of Sufism. Jawahir al-Ma'ani, his works were studied in Tijani Tekkaz in non-printed fashion. But in 1927, the first printing activity took place in Cairo, in Egypt, and they were distributed to the Tekkaz. Not only the Sufis, but also the opponents were also reading those. And Qadiris and Salafis came up with the idea that there's plagiarism in those works. So literally, it is literary theft. Some parts of it, they say, were quoted from some other books written centuries ago. Al-Maqsal al-Ahmad is the book. So this book was also written in Morocco by a Sufi, and it is about the teachings of Sufism, and this book was written and dedicated for his sheikh, and the book is actually verbatim. The quotations. And then Sufis wonder what they could do, because Salafis are all around them, and then they think thoroughly and say that we then need to review all of our sources. And then Tijanis go in confrontation with one another. There are the moderates. They say we are the Muslim, we have Quran and Hadith as our most important reference points, and then we will look into them, and if some other questions come, we will tackle them. And some others say, yes, we are the Muslim, but Tijani met the Prophet, and we have believed that so far, but when someone says that there is something against the Hadith, then, and if we accept it, then it means that we deny the truth and our devotion to Muhammad. So the confrontation, the discussions that were outside of their realm starts to go within their own group. So when I said transformation or the evolving in the Tijanis, I was exactly meaning that. So from 1800s to 1927, the book was deemed to be fully true in its words and sentences, but due to plagiarism allegations, Tijanis then started believing some parts of the book are not reliable, and they needed to correct under the light of Quran and Hadith. And they also reminded some words of the founder. He says, I am a Sufi sheikh, and do not believe in every word that you hear from me. If they go in line and overlaps with Quran and Hadith, believe in them, otherwise don't. And he says, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got very good translators, so I do have some questions that'll follow. Our next talk is by Nazli Kayahan, and it is on Futuwa in Ibn Arabi.
Merhaba, hoş geldiniz. Ben İbn Arabi'nin fütüvete bakışını çalışmak istedim bu tebliğde. Vahdet-i vücut düşüncesini sistemleştiren İbn Arabi ve onun ekolünün bu konudaki görüşlerinin derinlemesine incelendiği Türkçe kaynaklarının yetersiz olduğunu ben fark ettim kendimce. Onun için böyle bir çalışma yapmak istedim. Anladın mı derseniz çok fazla bir şey anladığımı söyleyemem ama çok zevk aldım. Onu paylaşmak istiyorum sizinle. İbn Arabi'nin bu konudaki düşüncelerine, görüşlerine, kısaca fütüvetin manası ve çok kısa tarihçesinden birkaç cümle sarf etmek istiyorum. Bilindiği gibi fütüvet, gençlik ve delikanlılık çağında olmak manasına gelen Arapça bir kelimedir. Aynı kökten gelen feta ve
As you know, it's an Arabic word, and it is actually a word that means the period of younghood. During Jahiliya era, we actually can see it as a social conception, and after the migration, the 2nd century, it has been connected to Nishabur Sufism and Sufis. Early Sufis, as in ancient Sufi literature, which is very dominant, the predominant principle, Isar, altruism, formed the basis of Futuwe. For example, sacrificing, quitting, complaining, forgiving others' faults were actually embedded in the meaning of chivalry and Futuwe. The first and the most important source is by Sülemi in his Kitab-ı Futuve and Kusheyri's Risale and Ensari's Fütüvetname, Hücviri's Keşfül Mahcub. The Sufi way of Futuwe is actually present there and is based on Sunni values. It's a beautiful conduct path, and it's the target of spiritual journeys, Seyr-i Suluk. So there are various definitions. Despite this, there is one common point, which is brave generosity. But of course, every Sufi has his own national disposition, and the definition is according to this disposition. So the wayfarer is actually receiving lessons regarding his spiritual journey, but there is a metaphysical reality, and this metaphysical secret and reality is first relieved by Ibn Arabi. In the light of Quranic Sunnah, Ibn Arabi reveals the deepest secrets, and his dimension in thinking gets deepened by his way of thinking oneness of being. So it is the gratitude to love and disposition. These are the concepts that are embedded with Futuwe, with chivalry. It actually is referred, according to Ibn Arabi, to the station of power. So you also can see chivalry in the person who manifests God's name, Al-Malik. So when you are in your young ages, this is actually the period where you have the most power. So it is actually Allah who creates power in you after weakness. So this is the this is the reference. So that's how you would actually have chivalry. In another hadith, the most powerful servant is actually the one who gives alms with the right hand, while the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So the right hand actually refers to the spiritual deeds, and left hand refers to being slave to your desires, to your ego. So if you are a person of your right hand, that means you give your alms with your right hand and your left hand is not aware of it. So such a person would be the most powerful of all the creatures. Ibn Arabi's masterpiece, Fütuhat-ı Mekkiye, starts with with a character that stands by the Kaaba, who is attributed to being a feta. So that anonymous person, who actually has the attributes of chivalry, is seen as both a scholar, beyond time, neither dead nor alive, both combining, encompassing and encompassed, witnessing and witnessed, simple and complex. So everything written actually in this book is actually taken from this disposition of this young boy, the feta, standing next to the Kaaba. So who is this feta? This feta is Ibn Arabi's real reality in the hereafter. So he is actually he is the one who make all his names manifest to Ibn Arabi. So we can understand that Ibn Arabi is actually confronting his essence. In other words, he finds all the haqq, the God, the truth in himself. So we also are faced with feta in another place. That is in the
Bir adayı ya da
So this refers to a mythological city. So this house actually symbolizes the heart. So the confrontation in the Kaaba is also taking place inside your heart. So since Mecca is actually the mother of all the cities, it's the center of all the globe. And Shaykh al-Akbar in his Futuhat talks about the Prophet's ascension, saying, I saw my Lord as a young boy with no beard. So in front of Kaaba, meeting feta is actually his meeting Allah. That's nothing else. So like Hazrat Ibrahim, who actually destroys the idols of his nafs, so it's only when you can actually see your own reality like he did. So when you are confronted with your essence, you contribute to your chivalry, which means this is your younghood, which is the source of your spirit. So Hazrat Mevlana also says the flesh is not away from the spirit. The spirit, is not away from the flesh, but not everyone is given the permission to be able to see the spirits. So it's only what is needed is you have to leave away your desires. So if you are confronted with your feta, that means you should be able to read your own book. You are actually a book of faith. It is such an open book that all the universe is inside of it. So take your tools with you and try to dig in. And first you will see earth, perhaps clay, and then the water, inshallah. And so being able to read your own book means being able to know your nafs. Reza Kashani establishes a relationship between fütüve and velayet. Velayet is actually, the sainthood is actually the highest makam, highest station. So if you can do something that you would do where everyone is around you, then that is fütüve. So you actually, if you have fütüve, then you actually go back to your essence, your capacity that have been allocated in the hereafter. Fıtrat is actually the knowledge of unity that has been created by God on the servants. Even though there are veils, it's actually a divine light that shines in the center of one's being. So actually, fütüve means conquering your darkness and not becoming a slave of your desires. So feta, actually, the person who attains feta can reach the real maqam, the real station of human being, and which also shows the gratitude of the Elest promise, aren't I your Lord? If there were no prophethood, then a human being wouldn't be able to know his essence, even though it is centered inside his being. All the blessings were actually descended onto the prophet first, and then on from the prophet onto the servants and on each and every being. So first, chivalry is actually descended on the prophet and then onto each and every being. After Mustafa, I would actually have such a blessing, is what Ibn Arabi said. So the climax point of fütüve is the station of friendship, hullet. If you can actually realize the attributes of Allah in yourself, then you can become the mirror of God, the truth. And this is possible if you can actually be the friend of Allah, as in Ibrahim. Because Ibrahim says, I learned generosity from my Lord. And Ibrahim is also an example of chivalry, because Allah said to him, you are my real friend, dost. So if you see no difference between the believer and the non-believer, then you can become a real feta. Because all the source is coming from Allah. You see the unity there. Sharia may not actually so what is the reason? Ibn Arabi says the reason of existence is actually fütüve. Allah actually creates the alam, the universe, sacrificing his own loneliness over his beings. Altruism is actually preferring others over your needs. So on the level of God, when God actually creates things, this is God's altruism, because Allah creates the universe for the universe, not for himself. So he actually preferred to share with his creatures. He didn't prefer his own loneliness, and he chose prophets and other saints to share this reality with his beings. I actually created all the humans and the jinnis to worship me. So he actually said, I created them not for the sake of them, but for my sake. So Allah veiled his blessing. So sometimes in the Quran it says, Because when you give alms, if you say, I did it, then if you show off, you would be lost, because whatever is given to you is given by God. I was a hidden treasure. I want to be known. So this is chivalry. For God's wanting to be known is actually a kind of a cover of his being unneediness. He didn't need anything. So he actually covered his being. So Allah actually said all the beings should reach their perfection. So that's why all the names have been embodied. But Allah said, I just created this universe because I wanted to be known. The absolute richness owner is Allah actually. He was all by himself, but he descended. So his love exceeded. That's why he created love. That's why human is created. Allah is created on mercy, on compassion. So this fitwa or rahmat that is manifest in him is revealed in his words as such. So this is entrusted, and then I saw how divine Allah was. This is such a great load on our shoulders. I would like to wrap up in 1 minute. According to Ibn Arabi, the reality of Ibn Arabi is to be able to understand humans' ontological neediness, and to be able to reveal the essence, which are actually the names of Allah. Another definition, it's actually keeping the promise and going back to your natural disposition and being able to discern and to be able to bear the beautiful conduct that is descended by the Prophet. If you don't have any power over your ego, then chivalry cannot even be mentioned. So it's a divine feature. You need Allah's creating the universe is also Allah's fituwat, Allah's chivalry. He loves them, they love him, so the source of love is Allah. So if Allah doesn't love you, then you wouldn't be able to love him. As Atif Hoca said, Allah doesn't turn to Allah with the El-Tawwab's name, so Allah wouldn't be able to have repentance. So the same thing goes for fituwa. So as long as you have the essence or the names of Allah's fituwa in you, you can show chivalry towards other people. So unneediness is actually haq. When we say fituwa, we mean actually the beautiful conduct. So if you gain your chivalry with beautiful conduct, this is what you need to attain, and this is what people need to be shown. Thank you very much.
Our next talk is by Saadat Mahmudova. It is a comparison of the concepts of physical reality, time, and space in modern physics and Ibn Arabi's thought.
Allahümme salli ala Muhammedin ve ala ali Muhammed.
Our topic today is about time and place. is about time and place, physical reality, time and place, and the comparison of these concepts in physical reality and in Ibn Arabi. Sorry, it's a very tough, very difficult topic, so I'll just try to tell as much as I can. It's open to talking for days and nights, non-stop. The vitality of the human being is based on the quality of the communication with the world and the quality of that communication. So actually the perception, reception, and definition of the external world being used in a fashion that meets the needs of human at the most convenient way is of critical importance. The external world, the physical reality, and the building blocks of that, which is time and space, and the content of these concepts cannot exist exclusive of the consciousness of the human being. And there are a couple of methods, 3 methods actually, in researching the physical reality. One of them is the experimental empirical research. The second is pure rational thinking. And the third one is the mystical and spiritual experiences and using the intuitional methods of acquiring knowledge. So when we look at the historical structure, almost 2,500 years ago, these had become open to discussion, and Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Zenon started discussing these. And in defining the external world, it all depends on defining the time and place, because they are the building blocks of the external reality. After Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Zenon, Platon and Aristotle also discussed the main qualities. There are 2 different concepts of time in ancient Greek. Space is a bit more understandable, it looks like, but time seems to be a major problem. And defining time has 2 different opinions, which we commonly see in the works of Platon and Aristotle. In the ancient Greek, there is Aeon and Chronos. Aeon is the time that can be perceived by the mind, which covers the past and future. And the way we perceive it in daily life is defined as chronos, the daily actual. But actually it's the shadow. Can you please warn our speaker to keep away from the microphone because it keeps blowing? Can she please keep a bit away and not blow into the microphone? Thank you. You need to probably say something. Thank you. Can you just wave to her or anything? Thank you. Based on Platon's ideas, time is created with the universe and there is an end to it. It is a reflection of eternity, and this is an reflection of eternity. The being is being, actually. It's time, but it's also being. It's also being. And the Platon calls this power the iron chest. And Aristotle thinks the world is created in time, and time is eternal, and time is everlasting, Plato says. And Aristotle explains time with movement and motion. Movement and motion is measured and defined with time, but time cannot for movement to take place, we need the space, and without the space, there's no time. Actually, right now, the time, right now that we are experiencing it, cannot be defined. It's actually another barzakh. There is no past, there is no present. Aristo believes that time is a sort of an illusion that is specific that human mind. So does it mean that everybody has their own understanding of time? No, that isn't. But that time is bound with our own understanding of time. So when we go to the depth of the definition of time and space, we see that it is actually defined by synchronicity and consequentiality. I'm hoping this is the word, sorry. And in the last 50 years, there had been amazing number of articles written until today in the philosophical history of last 2,500 years. There had been endless definitions and conceptualizations of time, which all the paradigms of thought are connected or correlated with time and space in one way or the other. And what they concluded is that there are two different definitions of time. One is time and space exist exclusive of material, and the second says time and space are the way of materials coming into existence. They can be subject to materials, and actually these two categories encompass pretty much all the definitions of time and space, and these current theories tell us as a conclusion both of these separate definitions are, first of all, inadequate, not enough, and we do not have sufficient evidence to choose one of these definitions over the other. So, time and space exist exclusive of materials as an absolute reality, or the second one says time and space do not have their independent existence or physical reality. They are just a state of existence of material things and processes. So 2,500 years ago, these questions are being discussed, and there is no actual or real response to that. Is time really flowing? Is there an end and start to it? Can it be made geometricalized? And if we live in now, is there a past and present? Is time one-dimensional or multidimensional, or is it comprehensive or absolute? And all of these things, there is no rule or law in physics that prevents time from flowing backwards. There are three questions about space. Is it and this is it discrete, or is it disjunctive? Is the space disjunctive, or is it not? Or is it isolated, or is it comprehensive? These are all, is it contiguous or discontiguous? These are all questions that come up. The classical Newton mechanics tells us that there is the absolute space and absolute time. So this is actually simplifying something, and the truth is really complicated. We need to simplify it. That's why we are bound to use models, so that we can at least have a way of starting to analyze things. And the model, of course, is not the reality itself, but the model works. So that is how all of the cars, devices, or the spaceships exist, all based on this model. In the classical Newton mechanics, there is the understanding or notions of absolute space and absolute time. We see these two notions as an object with a physical reality, and they have attributed many qualities to space and time, and they have seen this without any proof or evidence. It's been accepted with no proof or evidence given whatsoever, and the unilateral, unidimensional, absolute, and all of these are explained, and this is exclusive and independent of all the items that it brings into being. And this takes that the Euclidean theory is accepted in this structure. There's no problem about this. At the start of early 20th century, we know that there had been major problems in physics, and many topics are being used by classical physics. Actually, Einstein had two explanation theories.
And in the center of this theory, he used a mathematical model and placed the speed of light in the center of that. It is independent, it is absolute, and the other masses, the space or the time, they're all relative, and they may all change. So the most important contribution of Einstein is to do with the 4 dimensions of space and time. And he added an additional axis into time and came up with the quadruple of space and time, and says that 4 of them come together, combine, and they are adjacent or united, and the space. He says that space is 4-dimensional, and the universe is also 4-dimensional. And maybe he is not clearly expressing that, but it means that future and past is together, and we are now in the present, and we will see the future, but all of them are intertwined at the same time. And in Einstein's theory, space and time is combined, and there's a structure for that, and this structure, due to the objects there, it can be tilted or they are flexible, and with the mass of the object having their gravity, and here there's another interesting thing. You might assume time as the axis of coordinates, and then many things change once you do so. Normally we look into the movement of moon around the globe. It seems to be 2-dimensional, and on an orbit the moon rotates around the world, but if you put it around in the time axis, actually moon has a helix movement, and it doesn't come back to the same point it was before. This is a principal outlook, a perspective to it. And in the beginning of 20th century, with the relativity theory, quantum physics also started to be structured, and the physicians started claiming that the realm there is totally different, and neither the Newton or Einstein rules apply there. And they came up with a new physical approach, quantum physics. It operates in totally different rules. And this is the Planck scale. This is called Planck scale. This structure of the space is like a liquid of a quantum, and there are many virtual antiparticles, and it has such a structure. The main problem of the modern physics is to bring those theories together. There are many candidate theories, and one other theory is supersystem theory. The main elements of element, the main aspects of element are different particles. And the waves actually create the world. But in this theory, it is important to have a coherence, and for that, the universe needs to be at least 10-dimensional. And then we wonder where are the other dimensions. But the other 6 dimensions are compressed, and that's why we are unable to see it. And there we see 6, 7D compressed spaces. So this theory also have a lot of problems. It's easy to bring the sub levels to upper levels. I am out of time. I couldn't go into the theory of Ibn Arabi. If you allow me, maybe I can continue for 5 more minutes, but if you can't allow me to do so, that's all about it. Thank you.
Up the floor now for questions. We have a 15-minute question and answer session. Are there any questions? Cemal Nur Hoca.
Hocam önce this is not a question actually, but I would like to share that I really do agree with you from an experience of mine. A student of mine, you never know who is a student, but a student of mine was actually coming to my Quranic lessons, and we were talking about the Prophet's color being extremely dark and black and attracting you. And that night, that student of mine actually experienced near death, and she came back and she came to me and said, I'm a university graduate, I'm a very old person, I have some experiences, but when I studied the black divine light of the prophethood, all my trainings, all my education, all my knowledge was just nothing, because I was attracted by his divine black nur. But then my grandchild actually called grandma, and I had to return back. And then she came to me and explained everything. But then 1 week later, she passed away. So whatever we learn here in Tasawwuf actually teaches us our own reality. So that's what she learned, and this is also a kind of chivalry. And I would also like to add convey my special thanks to my dear daughter, who is working in China in our institute that we established in Kyoto. And this is a very good evidence showing how beautiful students our chair can actually create. When it comes to my son, I would like to say that I am very much influenced by Iqbal's words. It's actually not Islam's fault. It is the fault of the people who are trying to apply Islam but not able to. So real Muslims are not actually, or real Sufis are not actually opposing others. Maybe philosophers could, but not Sufis. Every Sufi has his or her own way of understanding. So if I actually become a Rifai, I would be a Rifai as much as Cemal Nur Hoca could be. So everyone can actually understand the tariqas as much as their sheikhs would actually tell them. So I was actually in quite close relationship with the Tijanis, and their teacher said, if I say something which is contradicting the Quran, don't believe me. So this is what a real Tijani teacher says, and my teacher would also say the same thing. So if we cannot actually apply things properly, then it's our fault. I would also like to thank Nazlı because Allah talked about Allah's chivalry. I know that what kind of texts she benefited from. For many years we have studied together with her. She is a very promising student, and how I wish I would also like to thank you. How I wish I would be able to listen to your connection with Arabi and the concept of time. Inshallah, I will be able to understand. Thank you.
Further questions? Yes, we have one from the gentleman at the back.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much to everyone. Saadet Hanım couldn't finish her talk, but let me ask a formative question so that she can finish her talk. In the universe, everything is connected to each other. This is a theory, well known, but there are some other simultaneity theories. So my question is, when oneness of being and the theory of particles, what is the connection with them? So can teleporting be used with the synchronicity theory? Ibn Arabi says in his oneness of being, there is a serious concept of time. A little bit scattered. There's also another Risale of his which we're able to access. Try to make there's a very serious notion of time. Yevm Shen, meaning Allah's day, which refers to on every moment and revive. So how could it mean every second this created by these vibrations. Allah's breath. So everything is composed of vibration. All the created is actually the words of Allah, which is also a vibration. So there is definitely a relationship. In modern physics, the ultimate point is that there is no ultimate thing. There is just one wholeness, which is multidimensional. There is a absolute oneness which all the created. So the theorems, the frequencies
from the Chinese. How is that between I'm not exactly sure how to imagine that. And the second one is, we know that currently, of course, like some areas in China experience quite a strong persecution as well of Muslim groups, for example in the Uyghur areas. How does that basically affect as well the natural media in that area? Do you have any information on that as well? Thank you.
Sanırım şu an Türkçe konuşabilir miyim lütfen?
So I will switch to Turkish right now. Kung Fu is actually a martial art that is performed by breath. And in Naqshbandiya there is this zikr type where you hold your breath and you send your breath on top of your heart. So you combine this martial art with the art of breathing, so there is you kill your breath. So when you perform these martial arts, you hold your breath and you strengthen your body. As I showed in my slides, the pictures, they're carrying a brick. One of them is actually on the floor, and that person is actually reciting Fatiha while handstanding. So all the research on Naqshbandiya and Chinese Sufis actually focus on not on Uyghur region, but the inner parts of China. Unfortunately, there isn't so much study or research on Uyghur, and it's actually problematic for researchers to be able to go to Uyghur area. So as you have seen, that's the reason why my research was on Muslims who speak Chinese.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating, and for the panelists for such excellent presentations. And we'll see you again in 45 minutes. Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you all again at 1:30, please. Thank you. 1:30'da tekrar görüşmek üzere. Pardon, okay, sorry, it's 1:45. 1:45'te görüşmek üzere. İyi günler.